I am not sure where the study is going to take us. I have so many things in my mind. I don't know exactly how to organize them because the subject is just so huge. And also because I really don't have the time to sit down and do PowerPoints and, make everything super tidy. But I still want to share with you all the things that are going through my head and all the scriptures that I'm reading because I think that the time is short. And so I want to make sure that I share. And like I've said so many times, I don't pretend to get everything right. But I feel a burden to read His Word and to do the best I can to understand. He has given us these prophecies with the understanding that if we put our full trust and love in Jesus Christ, Yahushua Mashiach, then we will know what these prophecies mean. It says right here in Revelation chapter 19, verse 9, then he said to me, write, blessed are those who are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he said to me, these are the true sayings of God. And I fell at his feet to worship him. But he said to me, see that you do not do that. I am your fellow servant and of your brethren who what? Have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God. For the testimony of Jesus, Yahushua, is the spirit of prophecy. The testimony of Yahushua is the spirit of prophecy. That is what we have to have in order to understand these prophecies. So let us keep seeking Him. I'm just going to keep pressing in and keep seeking Him with all my heart. And I believe, I have complete confidence that these prophecies will unfold and I will understand them. So I want to go back to Isaiah 17. This is the burden against Damascus. Now, Damascus, it was the capital city of Syria. And at one point was the territory of the Arameans. And the Arameans were the parents, right, of Abraham and of Sarah. That's where their people came from. And it's also where they went back to get a wife for Isaac and went back for wives for Jacob. Okay. So there is a very strong relationship between the Arameans, the people of Aram, and the Israelites. Now, remember, Damascus was the capital city of the Arameans. This is the burden against Damascus. Behold, Damascus is no longer a city. It has become a heap of ruins. The cities of Eror are forsaken. They will be left to the flocks, which will lie down with no one to fear. The fortress will disappear from Ephraim, and the sovereignty from Damascus. The remnant of Aram will be like the splendor of the Israelites. Now, this statement alone tells us that the time period that we're talking about here is the latter days. This has not yet been fulfilled. So we have to figure out who is this city of Damascus. Now, we have some clues here. So we understand that it's a city where there's sovereignty, right? There is royalty within this city, which of course makes me think about what we were just reading about in the very last video when I was asking who is Tyre. And remember, Tyre was called the crowning city. So I see a connection there. The fortress will disappear from Ephraim. Ephraim, we've explored Ephraim pretty thoroughly, that it's going to be the firstborn son, that it is where the New Jerusalem is going to be established, that Isaiah calls it Egypt in Isaiah 19. So we've explored all of this, all right? And we know that if Ephraim is where I think it is, which is the United States, they are a great military power. So the fortress will disappear from Ephraim and the sovereignty from Damascus. So both of these countries are going to implode, but it's going to happen for the good of his people. Just like it says, the remnant of Aram will be like the splendor of the Israelites. Why are they called the remnant of Aram? Because it was the Arameans who had control of Damascus. And they're taking something from the past and they are projecting it into the future so that we can see from the types and shadows what we're dealing with. It's a little deeper than that, though. So let me look at something with you. So I am very grateful for a brother who reminded me of Acts 29 from the Apocrypha. I'd read it a long time ago, but I hadn't read it recently, so it wasn't in my mind. I just pulled it up from the site's called Interfaith, just whatever site I found it in. So it says right here, and Paul, full of the blessings of Christ and abounding in spirit, departed from Rome, determining to go to Spain, for he had proposed to go there for a long time, and also from there to Britain. See? So according to this, okay, and I'm telling you, this is in the Apocrypha. But I do not believe that, well, how do I put this? I do believe that the 66 books that we have in the current canon is not all there is. And the Apocrypha actually was in the King James Version of the Bible up until around 1850. So it's only been recently that that's been taken out. Anyway, so let me just go back to this. So, and also from there to Britain. For he had heard, see, this is the part I wanted to bring up. For he had heard in Phoenicia that some of the children of Israel about the time of the Assyrian captivity, so had escaped by sea to the isles afar off, as spoken by the prophet. Now, this is interesting too, because who is this prophet? So we are missing some writings of prophets because we don't have this that I'm aware of in the prophecies. So this carrying away happened about 700 years before Christ, and a full 100 years before the southern kingdom was carried away by Babylon, right? I'm just going to double check those numbers and make sure I've got it right. Okay, so this one says around the 8th century BCE, so that would be 200 years before the southern kingdom was carried away by Babylon. Here it says, let's see, we're resettled immediately. Then Parsua is the only option, as the other two provinces were only established in 716 BC. Okay, I don't know. So sometime around there, as much as 200 years before the southern kingdom was carried away. Those numbers don't need to be precise. What we need to know, though, is that Israel was carried away long before, many generations before, by Assyria, before the southern kingdom was carried away by Babylon. And so there were rumors that some of these people got away from the Assyrian captivity by sailing to the British Isles. Okay, which would mean, oh my goodness, we have Israelite people living in the British Isles, 700 or 800 years before Christ. Okay, and according to this, indeed, there were Israelites there in Britain at the time that Paul arrived. It says, and when leaving Spain, and Paul and his company found a ship in Armorica, which was sailing to Britain. They sailed along the south coast until they reached a port called Raphanus. Now, when it was known that the apostle had landed on their coast, great multitudes of the inhabitants met him, and they treated Paul courteously, and he entered in at the east gate of their city, look at this, and stayed in the house of a Hebrew, one of his own nation. So, obviously, there were Hebrews there at the time. I mean, if this is a true text, at least by this time, and they were already obviously well established there by this time, which is the time just after Christ's crucifixion, right? And then there is already a church being established here, because it says the next day he came to Mount Lud too, and to Mount Lud, and the people thronged the gate and assembled in the broad way, and he preached Christ to them, and they believed the word and the testimony of Yahushua, of Jesus. And yet we're being told that the gospel did not come until the time of St. Patrick, which was, I don't know how many hundreds of years later. And then coming down a little further, it says, and it came to pass that certain of the Druids came to Paul privately and showed by their rites and ceremonies that they were descended from the Jews, which escaped from bondage in the land of Egypt. And the apostle believed these things and gave them the kiss of peace. So here are people who had obviously dwindled in unbelief and became Druids, but they still had this understanding that at one point their ancestors were Israelites who had come out of Egypt. Why do I mention all of this? I mention all of this because I think we need to understand how complex the population of England is currently. It would seem that there may be some credence to the fact that there have been Israelites who have been gathered at different times to England, including perhaps there are stories that Joseph of Arimathea went there after Christ's death and established the church there. So we have all of these different traditions and also some written suppositions about the fact that this seems to be a land where God, because I do believe his hand is in everything, and nobody is taken to any land. No one is inspired to leave and go anywhere without God's hand being upon it. I believe in his absolute sovereignty, and I believe in his interworkings within our lives as individuals, as the supreme being. He has the power to track the billions of people or millions of people, depending on what time of history we're talking about. They're on the earth at all times and knows every intimate detail of all of our lives. And he is orchestrating, especially the lives of those who trust in him and who believe. So we already have the Britons, right, who are probably Hebrews, right? And then we've also got the Picts and the Scots up north. We have those that are in Ireland. And then we have this invasion that happens starting, they're estimating around AD 410. So this is long after. This is, almost, 380 years or so after Paul visits. The church is obviously well established at this point. And then we have the Angles and the Saxons coming in. Now, I'm not exactly sure who any of these people are, and the Vikings then later, right? I'm not exactly sure who they are. I've heard people talk about the fact that this is probably a form of the name Isaac, and it might very well be. Something interesting about that, though, is based on some of the prophecies that we read, it makes me wonder if it could be the name Isaac. So what I've heard is it's the name Isaac, and so these are Hebrews. But remember, Isaac had 2 sons. So could these be some of Esau's descendants, for instance? I don't know. It's just something to think about, right? And therefore they would take on the name Isaac. They wouldn't be taking on the names of any of the 12 tribes or of Jacob, because those aren't their progenitors, right? I mean, I don't know. I am throwing out ideas here. So I ran into this Celtic prayer that was the copy they have that has been found dates back to about 650 AD. I'm not convinced that that's where this necessarily originated, because I do believe that Christianity was established very early, because, of course, Christ told the disciples to go to all of the lost sheep. So, since there are so many rumors that those lost sheep are in Spain and they are in Britain, of course, the gospel had to have come to them early through those original disciples. So this is now, 600 years after that. But anyway, it's just beautiful, and it shows how incredibly Christ-centered the church was. I rise today with the power of God to pilot me, with God's strength to sustain me, with God's wisdom to guide me, with God's eye to look ahead for me, God's ear to hear me, God's hand to protect me, God's shield to defend me, God's angel host to deliver me. Around me I gather today all these powers of heaven against every cruel and merciless force that attacks my body and soul. May Christ protect me today. Christ beside me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ within me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ to the right of me, Christ to the left of me, Christ in my rest, Christ in my sitting, Christ in my rising, Christ in the heart of all who think of me, Christ on the tongue of all who speak to me, Christ in the eye of all who see me, Christ in the ear of all who hear me. Around me I gather the powers against the charms of false prophets, against the black laws of paganism, against the false laws of heretics, against the illusions of idolatry, against the spells of witches, smiths, and druids, and all the sorcerers' unlawful knowledge that harm the body and the soul. The Spirit of Christ runs deep. This cannot be denied. In this land of Britain, where the beginning of the very word Britain, BRT, probably ties to the word in Hebrew, Brit, which means covenant. So Britain would mean the land of covenant. The Spirit of Christ runs incredibly deep in this land, which is why there is such a heritage of missionaries who have given their lives all over the world from Great Britain. Some of the greatest theologians that ever lived have come from Great Britain. Why? Because probably the blood of the Hebrews, and also I would say the blood of Shem, the Arameans, runs deep in that country. I don't know which group would represent the Arameans, but since they seemed it's referring to the city of Damascus in that prophecy, which was the capital city of the Arameans, and since it talks about let's just go back to that verse. Okay, so Isaiah 17:3, the fortress will disappear from Ephraim, and the sovereignty from Damascus, from the capital city. Well, the capital city, if this is truly Great Britain that we're talking about, is London. Okay, and then it says the remnant of Aram will be like the splendor of the Israelites. So there is going to be a remnant left. And I don't know that these people are necessarily Arameans, but it seems like those that are in leadership, the ruling family, may very well be Arameans. And this is something I don't know enough about. I don't know about the genealogy and where the royal family comes from and all of that. But I do find this fascinating. The remnant of Aram will be like the splendor of the Israelites. So these people are going to be an incredibly righteous people that are going to be left in the land after the ruling city is destroyed, or in other words, the rulership is taken out of the hands of the sovereigns that are ruling over them. In that day, the splendor of Jacob will fade, and the fat of his body will waste away. So if you go to my earlier videos, I believe what I'm understanding is that Jacob are the Christians, those who say they're Christians, but are not in faith or righteousness. Now, this could very well be the Christians of the United Kingdom, since we are talking about the sovereign city. It could also be the United States, because we also talked about the fortress disappearing from Ephraim. I really think that the UK and the United States are very closely tied. As a matter of fact, I believe that Ephraim came out of the UK and fled for religious purposes, or a large group of them anyway, to the United States. So this is a really big tapestry, and there's a lot of strings to keep track of. In that day, the splendor of Jacob will fade, and the fat of his body will waste away. As the reaper gathers the standing grain and harvests the ears with his arm, as one gleans heads of grain in the valley of Rephaim. Yet gleanings will remain. Okay, so here is the remnant that it just talked about. The remnant of Aram will be like the splendor of the Israelites. Yet gleanings will remain like an olive tree that has been beaten, 2 or 3 berries atop the tree, 4 or 5 on its fruitful branches, declares Yahweh, the God of Israel. In that day, men will look to their Maker and turn their eyes to the Holy One of Israel. That's Yahushua HaMashiach. Every time I see the Holy One of Israel in the Old Testament, I know it's talking about Yahushua HaMashiach. They will not look to the altars they have fashioned with their hands, or to the Asherahs and incense altars they've made with their fingers. In that day, their strong cities will be like forsaken thickets and summits, abandoned to the Israelites and to utter desolation. Abandoned to the Israelites and to utter desolation. But here's what I wanted to talk about, are the Asherahs. Because I had someone ask me to look at a video. Let me see if I have that video up. Yes. This is the video of Queen Victoria celebrating her 70th year of reigning. And it's very, very curious. And I'll tell you, it may mean, it may not have anything to do with the meanings that I am musing about here. But since they don't tell us what the symbolism is, because I went looking, that these different things are representing, then that leaves us open to just search it out for ourselves, right? So here we have Queen Victoria, and she's coming up to this podium. Now look at the color of this podium, because I'm going to make a point about that later. Look at this bright fuchsia pink. Okay, and what's about to happen is that this gentleman is going to place this object, let me just get to that point, on the podium. And the object that he's placing on the podium is a blue and gold pillow, and atop it is a globe. And on the globe are, in gold, are all representing all of the countries that are part of the Commonwealth of Great Britain. And then this globe is sitting inside a crown. Now I want to show you a little bit of a close-up of the crown. So this is the crown, and according to what I read, these stones that are at the base of the crown, which is really interesting because remember that the city of our God is going to have stones in its foundation, right? And the stones are the people. But anyway, so it has these stones, and these stones have been gathered from the 4 highest mounts in Britain. And then if you'll look, the crown is surrounded by these fleur-de-lis. Okay, so they're called fleur-de-lis, but they're more than that. They're a trident, and we're actually going to bring that in to this discussion here in just a second. Okay, and now the queen is going to come up, and she is going to push on the globe, and in so doing, it's weird there, all of a sudden it's going to start lighting up this, what looks like a triple helix, which is an interesting choice for them to use. And this triple helix is just going to keep lighting. Okay, I guess I should make this big. It's going to keep lighting until it reaches this. And this is not a real tree. This is a sculpture of a tree, this stylized tree. Very interesting. Okay, now they're calling it a beacon because beacons were used to signal, great events, or to coordinate. What's the word I'm looking for? To coordinate attacks and things like that, right? So they've been used by royalty for a long time. So they're calling this a beacon. But a beacon for what? What are they raising a signal for? What are they signaling with this? What does it say? They will not look to the altars they have fashioned with their hands, or to the Asherahs and incense altars they have made with their fingers. So this is something that the people are doing, because it says in that day. So this is a latter-day prophecy. In that day, this is being done. And it's really interesting because just as a regular old person, I've never heard of people setting up Asherahs. And, there aren't any altars that I know of, in my neighborhood. And so, I know that people can have altars in their homes, right, where they'll put little figurines and things. But anyway, you'll see where I'm going with this in a second. So Asherah worship was a thing that was plaguing Israel and the southern kingdom, especially. Well, that's what he's talking about here, because this is the time of Jeremiah. So this is the southern kingdom that he's talking about here, because that's where he was living. And it says here in Jeremiah 44, verse 15, then all the men who knew that their wives had burned incense to other gods, with all the women who stood by, a great multitude, and all the people who dwelt in the land of Egypt and Pathros, answered Jeremiah, saying, as for the word that you have spoken to us in the name of Yahweh, we will not listen to you, but we will certainly do whatever has gone out of our mouth. Look at this, to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, okay, and pour out drink offerings to her, as we have done, we and our fathers. So this is a long-standing tradition for them. Our kings and our princes in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. Okay. Here are examples of inscriptions that were found in storage jars going back to the 8th century before Christ. Here's one of them. Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah. So Samaria would have been the northern kingdom, right? Yahweh of Teman and his Asherah. Okay, so we see here that Asherah is being coupled with Yahweh. Here is a brief history of who Asherah is. Asherah, ancient West Semitic goddess, consort okay, or female partner of the supreme God. Her principal epithet was probably she who walks on the sea. She was occasionally called Elat, the goddess, and may also have been called Kudshu, holiness, according to the text from the Ugarit, modern Ras Shamra, Syria. Asherah's consort was El. Okay, this is one of the names that's given to Yahweh in the Bible. Okay, and by him, look at this, she was the mother of 70 gods. Now wait. This ceremony took place on the anniversary of the 70th year of the reign of Queen Elizabeth. Okay? And Asherah was considered the mother of 70 gods. This also makes me think of the Table of Nations in the book of Genesis, right? Like ruling the entire world, the mother of the entire world. As mother goddess, she was widely worshipped throughout Syria and Palestine, although she was frequently paired with Baal, who often took the place of El. As Baal's consort, Asherah was usually given the name Baalat. Inscriptions from 2 locations in southern Palestine seem to indicate that she was also worshipped as the consort of Yahweh, the Queen of Heavens, the Queen of Heaven, to which they were baking cakes in the book of Jeremiah. Okay, I want to show you that she was tied to the tree of life, right? So Ugaritic amulets show a miniature tree of life growing out of Asherah's belly. According to Asherah poles, which were sacred trees or poles, are mentioned many times in the Hebrew Bible, right? And that's true. So I looked it up, and Asherah or Asherah poles are mentioned 40 times in the Old Testament. Now, it's not always translated as Asherah or Asherim. Often it's translated in the Bible as groves or trees. And so we don't realize that we're even reading about the goddess, the Phoenician goddess, Asherah. Okay? But like in Exodus here, and cut down their Asherim. Okay? We have Deuteronomy, and hew down their Asherim and burn. Here's Judges chapter 3, verse 7. So the children of Israel did evil in the sight of Yahweh. They forgot Yahweh their Elohim and served the Baals and Asherahs. There was even a commandment given to the Israelites in Deuteronomy 16:21. You shall not plant for yourself, look at this, any tree as a wooden image, or this actually is Asherah. Okay, you shall not plant for yourself any tree as an Asherah near the altar which you build for yourself to Yahweh your Elohim. You shall not set up a sacred pillar. Now this is interesting. I want to pay attention to this too. Which Yahweh your Elohim hates. You shall not set up a sacred pillar. Okay, this is definitely referring back to this tree or Asherah. Okay, here it's calling it a sacred pillar. Why am I going here? Now we're going to look at this video and get into these pieces. Okay. Also, I want to make a point here that the number 3 is everywhere in this, around this event. This was actually done on the day that the moon was 3 days old. Okay. She died, Queen Elizabeth died 3 months and 6 days after this event. Also, she died on November 8th, 3 days before November 11th. I just find these threes fascinating. And then, like I said, if you look here, these are 3 strands that are interwoven. Now, as Christians, I would immediately think, oh my, so these strands are representing the 3 members of the Godhead, right? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And this is the tree of life, right? Because they are going to light up their country for Yahushua Mashiach, for Christ. But I know better. So we have to ask ourselves instead, what is this? Another thing interesting, hang on. So I just wanted to point out this one other thing about Asherah that I forgot to mention. So Asherah was one of the chief deities of the ancient world. Most believe she was the wife of the supreme god and the mother of Baal. Now remember, in some areas she was the consort of Baal, but in other in other traditions she was the mother of Baal. So look at this. So we have Asherah, the wife, we have El, the husband, and Baal, the son. Okay. So instead of the triple helix representing the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, given the fact that a stylized tree is the symbol of Asherah, which is a female goddess that was adored by Israelites throughout many, many, many generations, you have to wonder if this triple helix instead is Asherah, El, and Baal, right? And then the tree itself is representing Asherah. Because remember, we read that in one of the figurines that they've recovered, there is a tree of life coming out of the belly of Asherah because she is the mother of the 70 gods, right? But something else interesting that we read is that the Israelites were commanded not to place an Asherah or a tree next to an altar to Yahweh. So evidently it was normal to place them next to altars. Okay, look at this. Could this possibly be a stylized altar? And what is being sacrificed on the altar? The entire world. How about this? Rulership of the entire world being placed on the altar. I mean, I don't know. I'm throwing ideas out here. This was another thing that I wanted to tell you too, is that one of the gods that has been bantered about a lot lately, who has a huge statue at CERN, is Shiva, right? And that is an Indian goddess, right? Or god. Actually, I think it's a god, but it's funny because it actually looks like a woman. So it's very confusing. But hang on one second, I want to show something to you. So let me just read this a little bit to you. The Hindu god Shiva, Sanskrit auspicious one, is one of the principal deities of Hinduism, worshipped as the paramount lord by the Saivite sects of Nepal, also known as the destroyer and the restorer, within the, look at this, 3 Trimurti, the Hindu trinity that includes Brahma and Vishnu. Interesting, right? Shiva is the supreme being who creates, protects, and transforms the universe. The iconographical attributes of Shiva are the serpent around his neck, the adorning crescent moon. Remember, the moon was 3 days old when the ceremony was done. The holy river Ganga flowing from his matted hair. You know, this is interesting too, because this was done at Windsor Castle, and there's something interesting about Windsor, where Windsor Castle is actually located. Let me show that to you. So this city here is London. Let me go out some so you can see that. So here's London, okay? And then coming over from London, here is the airport, Heathrow Airport, and then Windsor Castle. And then the thing that I wanted to show you that's interesting about Windsor Castle is that here is the River Thames. And look, it actually breaks, there's the bottom half, and here's the top half, into 2 rivers right here, which makes me think of the Euphrates and the Tigris. Isn't that interesting? And then Windsor Castle is right here. Okay, right at the bottom, close to the confluence here, where these two are coming back together. The holy river Ganga flowing from his matted hair, the third eye on his forehead, the trishula or trident as his weapon, and the demura drum. Okay, so that's why I told you to pay attention to what was on the crown. Tridents all around the crown. And remember what I said about this. So think of this as a moonstone, as a standing stone, as an altar, okay? This is fascinating. Look at the color that this thing is. 12 days after that ceremony, that was June 2nd, this is June 14th, 12 days, a multiple of 3, interestingly enough. Look at this rare celestial spectacle of strawberry supermoon. This is what occurred, an incredibly rare strawberry supermoon, just 12 days after this ceremony. And the ceremony was held on the 3rd day of the moon. Okay, when the moon was 3 days old. This is really fascinating. Look at the color of this moon. Look at the color of the podium. So, as a follower of Yahushua Mashiach, I would like to believe that this was just a ceremony, like I said, lighting that nation up for the Holy Trinity, right? For the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then the representation of the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. But knowing how wicked the rulers are in every country of the world, I don't hold out hopes for that. And I always go back to the scriptures. And like I said, this is talking about the latter days. In that day, men will look to their Maker and turn their eyes to the Holy One of Israel. Right? This is talking about that remnant that's going to remain. They will not look to the altars they have fashioned with their hands, or to the Asherahs and incense altars they have made with their fingers. And this took place in the garden of Windsor Castle. And I just want to bring us back also to Isaiah chapter 1. It says right here, "For they shall be ashamed of the terebinth trees which you have desired." What are the terebinth trees? Going down to letter Q, the sites of pagan worship. Okay, I would say probably the Asherah trees, which you have desired, and you shall be embarrassed because of the gardens which you have chosen. For you shall be as a terebinth whose leaf fades, and as a garden that has no water. The strong shall be as tinder. Now notice it's not talking about the remnant. There will be a remnant. In another verse it says, and they will lie down as the lambs, right? In these cities that are being destroyed, they will lie down in peace because they're going to inherit it. The meek of the earth will, those that follow Yahushua Mashiach. So it says, the strong will be as tinder, and the work of it as a spark. Both will burn together, and no one shall quench them. So I know I was all over the place. I hope when I go back and look at this all made sense, because there was so much to track. And I hope this was of worth to someone. But I felt inspired that having done all of this research, I needed to share it. And I am not saying that my understanding is correct yet. What I am saying is that I trust, because I believe in Yahushua Mashiach. I believe in Jesus Christ as my Savior. He is mighty to save. He is the Holy One of Israel. And because of my testimony in him, I have faith that I will receive the spirit of prophecy and I will understand these prophecies as I need to. As that knowledge becomes needed for me, it will become known to me. In that I trust. Blessings and shalom.